Hello, and welcome to my review of my painted, finished, Master Grade Sword Impulse Gundam. So here's my Master Grade Sword Impulse Gundam after I completely painted, decaled, panel lined, and customized it with some scribe lines and some exposed armor pieces. So for the inner frame, I used the Note gunmetal with a bit of Starbright brass. The brass is pretty subtle. I mainly use it for the vents, back of the knees, and some pretty hidden pieces of the inner frame that you can kind of see at certain angles. I felt that the brass worked better with the warm red color, and I also just didn't have any silver on me. And speaking of red, the red that I use is just the regular Gaia Note red, and I added a bit of yellow and white for the highlights to give it more of a warm neon highlight look. For the main off-white color, I used neutral gray with added about 5% black, and that's for the base coat. And for the highlights, I just used the regular Gaia Note neutral gray one. For the darker grays, like here on the shoulder and on the knees, I used the neutral gray but added around 40% black. And I did try to do some highlighting with it, but I don't think it's too subtle. And in a way, I kind of like that. Now for the really dark colors, like here on the legs and on the backpack, that's going to be a midnight blue. So I mixed the Gaia Note blue with around 40% black to produce that. And I didn't really bother with highlighting it since I felt that highlighting it would kind of ruin the dark accent color that it gives off. The yellow is pretty standard. There's not too much yellow on here, mainly small pieces like on the knees, the chest, and the V-fin. That's just going to be a regular Gaia Note yellow with a bit of highlights. Usually with yellow parts, I like to do a black basing method, but for here, it's so subtle that I just did some very subtle highlights. The backpack contains some unique colors, mainly the light blue and the light blues on the Excalibur swords. On top here, I did more of a purple look for the handle, whereas down here I went more with a dark navy blue. So yeah, that's it for the color scheme. I basically kept it pretty similar, but added some new accents like the dark gray to kind of complement the more detailed look of my new scribed panel lines. So here's just a quick look at the base kit, so you can get a better idea of the detailing and custom work that I did on the kit. Most of the water slides that I used were from leftover slides from other kits, warning signs and whatnot. These bigger ones I got from Delphi Decal. They have a specific set for the Master Grade Force and Sword Impulse Gundam. Though I did find that most of the decals were way too large to fit anywhere on the Gundams. You don't get many warning signs. The most you're going to get are some very small Impulse Gundam and Pilot Shin Asuka decals. So I had to resort to using other kits' decals for the warning signs and whatnot. Here's just a quick look at the shield. I tried to scribe some more elaborate lines on here, but unfortunately, didn't turn out that well. Fortunately, I'm probably not going to be displaying it with the shield that often, and the scribes that I did on the main body are definitely a lot better than the ones on here. Here's just a quick look at the backpack. I actually really like the subtle highlighting that I did on the red. I think it really pops. Probably doesn't show up that apparent on camera because it's in video mode, but I think it looks a lot better in person. And on the anti-ship swords, I really like how I did these two tones of gray, the really darker ones for the handle and the hilt, and of course a lighter one for the rest of the blade. These decals are dry transfers, which were actually pretty easy to apply since this is a pretty big flat piece. Now onto the fun part, the posing. And while you probably don't want him displayed like this, he does look pretty damn good shooting his beam rifle. And like any good seed kit, it's pulling off the trademark Ale Strike title card pose. Well, I guess the Force Impulse technically does it too. The menacing reaching over his shoulder to pull out his huge sword pose works very well on the Impulse. And even more so when he goes back for both swords. Getting him to hold his huge swords like this, even in a standing pose, is still pretty impressive. Though I guess you do owe that to the fact that the Excaliburs are more long than they are thick. And here he is combining his two giant Excalibur swords. I guess you could say that it was its destiny to pull off this pose. He's gonna have no problem pulling off his signature pose up in the air. And he's gonna have no problem pulling off the box art. And this is still probably my favorite pose to have him posed in. Of course, doesn't require an action base, but still shows off just how massive the combined Excalibur swords are. And here's just a neat little variation where he's holding his beam rifle and his shield. So this is my first time scribing panel lines on a kit, as well as cutting out pieces of armor so you can see more into the inner frame. I'm overall pretty happy with how the kit came out. Obviously, some panel lines could have been a lot straighter and probably a bit shallower, but I think on a model kit, most of the time you aren't putting it under a magnifying glass, and it looks pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with how this kit turned out. Very happy with the colors in particular, as well as the gunmetal inner frame. So, thank you for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.